Hey there, welcome back. This is Sean. We're going live again. We've got a live problem now, slightly different than the last one. Problem with this is, I think it won't turn on. It's making a sound, or you can hear the fan or something like that. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Okay. And then it powers itself back down, right?
Right.
Okay. How long do you hear the fan? About a couple of seconds?
If even that long.
Okay. All right. Now, I just got here. I haven't looked at anything yet, and we're going to see what happens. See if we can get to the bottom of this one. So it's all plugged in. It's an emachine. And I'm going to hit the power button. Okay, nothing happened. I heard the fan spin up. Just a second or two, that's all we get. Oh, almost. And that's what was happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, typically when that happens, my experience, my hunch would be something thermal related, overheating. Although it could be power supply related too. So what I did ahead of time is, after hearing the symptoms on the phone, I suggested that they pick up some Arctic silver, which I was all out, and having an inclination that it was either going to be an overheating issue or power supply. I actually had an extra ATX power supply and I brought that with me. But we're going to diagnose this, and we're going to assume it could be anything at this point. So I'm going to unplug everything here. Back. I'm noticing it's awful dusty. See, that's a good sign. There's a good amount of dust in there. And you can see right here too. I brought some of this duster cleaner. Is a good thing to get. And once a month or so, it's a good thing to blow the dust out of there, especially if it's in a high dust gathering location. Panel comes off fairly easily. I'm just going to hit this. Got it off. Good enough. Alright. Ooh. Take a look down inside there. See the dust on the top of the fan?
Mm-hmm.
That's the CPU of the processor. And that can add to some problems over time. So it's a good idea to take a look at that every now and then. If it gets to be that bad, it's worth the time and effort to clean it. Okay, so now how are we going to diagnose this? Well, this so happen to have a switch mode, sort of like it's a switching power supply, and it's capable of testing both architectures, IDE or serial ATAs, SATAs. And so what we're going to do is we're going to use this, and we're going to first of all test the power supply. And to do that, first you're going to remove you've got a 24-pin connector here to the motherboard. And by the way, you should have, before you get involved with anything, removing any connectors or cables, you should unplug the power cord first and give it a good 10-second count for any capacitance charge to discharge. Also, it's a good thing to have an ESD wrist strap. I do not have one on me, so I'm going to be very careful. I'm off the carpet. I'm going to discharge the capacitance in the static in my hands on the chassis, and still be very careful touching circuit board components. So start with this 24 pin. You got that? The 24?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to position this just like so. And if you look, we've got quite a few different levels, voltage levels here. +5, -5, +12, -12 volts. We got a 5-volt standby. Okay, and this is going to simply plug in like so. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's see what we got. Can you see the green LED lights?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we've got 3.3 volts, -12, PG, +5, SB, +12, and we've got +5. We don't have -5. We don't need that one. If you look on the power supply itself, the DC output, you'll notice it says 3.3 volts, +5, +12, -12. I'm sorry, +12 and -12 and +5 standby. So you won't get the -5 on this. So that appears to be good so far. Okay, now then, I'm going to turn it down, unplug it. And this power supply actually has a switch on the back to kill the power coming into the supply. It's essentially doing the same thing as unplugging it, but just to be on the safe side, I'm going to unplug it. Okay, now I'm going to remove, we've got two different architectures here. Looks like we've got a serial ATA here, hard drive, SATA hard drive, and it looks like we've got an IDE CD-ROM drive or a DVD drive, one of the two. Okay, so I'm going to begin, and by the way, this is the data cable, and this is the power cable. At this point, what we're really interested in is the power cable. The data will not cause this to happen. So we're going to just remove this. Okay. Now, on the tester, you've got a SATA input for a SATA connection. You've also got one for an IDE. So with this, we're going to go for the SATA. And it only plugs in one direction. Like so. And let's see what we get. Okay. Add itself here. I'm getting nothing. Right? If I'm getting nothing here, then it's getting nothing there. One more thing we can check. This is the P4 connector here. If you notice, right underneath here, it'll tell you if you've got the 6P, the 8P, or the 4P, and right here we've got the 4P. It's going to plug in right here. So we're going to check that for a 12 volt level. And as you can see, I've got the 12 volt level. So that's good. Okay, now see what the IDE is going to look like. And this will only plug in one direction as well. Upside down. All you're looking for here is you're looking for the 12 volts and the 5 volts for the IDE. You need the 3.3 for the SATA, and we didn't see that. Okay. Shut that off. There we go. So it looks like the voltage level coming out feeding the IDE devices is okay. But for somewhere along the line we're missing the 3.3 volt level coming out, as well as the 5 and the 12, because you need that for here too. So already my suspicion is something wrong with the power supply. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this alternate power supply that I've got here. I'm going to remove the 24 pin from the suspected faulty power supply, and I'm going to use the one off of here. Same thing. Plugs in like so. This would be our P4. That would plug into the motherboard, then provide the 12 volts. We can check that. We can check that right now. And again, this only plugs in one direction. And I had it in the wrong direction. I should have done this one. Okay. Now, let's give it some juice. I'm going to take the power cord and plug it into the new power supply. You got to plug it in the old one, you're not going to see anything. This one has a switch on the back too. I'm going to turn it on. If you notice something, we've got 3.3 volts here. Okay. And we've got the 12, so we're good there. That looks okay. And shut that down. Let the capacitance discharge. That's just a habit, by the way. There wasn't too much capacitance there except for what's in the power supply, because we weren't going through the motherboard, but it's just a rule of thumb, a good habit to get into. So now what we're going to do next is we're going to check the voltage levels coming off of each of these serial ATA connectors and IDE connectors. And you can take any one at a time. This is the serial ATA. Okay, it'll plug in one direction only, like so. And if you'll notice, I've got the 3.3 level here coming out of this. Now we didn't have that off of the other one. So the 3.3 volt level was causing a problem. Thinking that was probably the root of the cause. Now let's just check the IDE levels. And again, these are kind of D-sub in shape and design. They're only going to fit in one way. And we got our 5 volts and our 12 volt level, and we're good here as well. So that's good. It's actually a brand new one. I had bought a bare bones case, and I was going to build a screaming gaming machine and throw it on eBay. But I got distracted and I never finished the project, so I still had a 400 watt ATX power supply, which is the same wattage rating. And by the way, that's how you want to shop for these, is in terms of the wattage rating of the power supply. For their purposes, 400 watts is plenty for playing bingo and solitaire. Okay. Turn the power off to that. Now we're going to confirm this. Because we may still have a thermal issue. We don't know that yet. All we know at this point is that we do not have the 3.3 volt level coming out of this other one. So now you can do one of two things. There's no point in leaving that in there, so we may as well remove it. But if you wanted to verify this, you could simply lay this on the table or on top, plug your 24-pin connector into the existing motherboard, along with your 4P 12 volt level into the connector by the processor, and then you in turn plug each power cord into the corresponding drives, the hard drive and the CD-ROM drive in this case. And you can just temporarily keep this out of the case, hook up your connections from your monitor using the VGA and so on and so forth, or unless you have EVI. And with it just like it is, you can hit the power button, look on your monitor, and just see what happens. But there's no point in doing that because we know we have a problem with the 3.3 volt level, so we're going to go ahead and remove that. Four screws is the standard for removal. And while I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and remove this fan. Combination fan and heatsink, by the way. So you remove the four screws, you're going to be removing the fan and the heatsink. This is kind of a bulky heatsink here, and it would almost be, by the looks of it, pretty difficult to remove the power supply without it having some play in this and loosening it. Okay, and they're using some cable ties here, some zip ties. We're going to need to remove those. And there you go. That's all there is to that. Now, while we're here, remember not to this is not totally free yet. You've got a little connection here on the board you need to remove. Now you're free. Now what we're going to do is we're going to clean this out and get it on the dog's coat. Okay.
Zipper.
Pretty bad. Sorry, Ray, I'm getting dust all over your office. Should be good enough. And you see on the bottom here, you've got some old thermal paste. We're going to clean that off with some, preferably alcohol. And we're just going to shoot right here. See that dust?
Mm-hmm.
That should be good enough. Next thing what you want to get is a static free cloth. This is static free. And remove the old alcohol from the top of the processor. I'm sorry, remove the old thermal paste from the top of the processor. Now, this is just preventative right here. We don't really have to do this right now. I think the only problem we have is the 3.3 volt level. But we're going to remove the dust and we're going to lay down some fresh new Arctic Silver thermal paste and give that processor some longevity. I also want to remove it from the bottom of the heatsink. And if you don't have any alcohol on you, just make sure you get a real good clean. Okay. Now then, that's what the Arctic Silver looks like. Comes in a little tube like that. It doesn't take too much of this. Just like putting an eye drop in your eye. That's all you need is a little drop on that. One or two. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the heat sink and fan assembly and I'm simply going to position that where it would go. And I'm going to kind of rotate it like this just slightly to spread that thermal paste. And we need just a little bit more of it. I'll put it on here. And I'll just spread it around with my fingers. How are we doing on time there, Ray?
24:57.
Okay.
58.
Nice even coat. Most of these heatsink assemblies, you don't have to spread this out with your finger like that. You can put a few good drops on there and you can just spread it out evenly. But in this case, this is pretty bulky, and the way these set down into the board, it just makes it real tough for accomplishing that. So be really careful with the processor. If you ever have to remove one of these processors due to failure, they're nowadays they're what they call zero insertion force, or ZIF. And pin 1 it'll only go in one direction, so it makes it really difficult to screw up, and putting it back in simply unclips and it pops off, and you can that's a whole different other video. So I'm going to put this back down, and remember the position we had it in was like this. Line up the screws with the holes. Before I tighten it down, I'm going to take the new power supply. We've already tested it. Now at this point, if something happens and it still doesn't power on, we're going to begin looking at the motherboard next, because we've already looked at the possibility of a optical drive or the hard drive loading down the power supply, and we've kind of isolated that already, so we know that's not the case. These things come in pretty handy. I'll put a link on my page there, and provide you with a source where you can get one of these. They're not that expensive, but they come in awfully handy. More screws. And I don't screw them in all the way. You might have to maneuver it back and forth on the bottom or on the top. Okay, now I'm pretty well lined up. Now I'll go ahead and tighten them. It's okay to tip this up like this too, so you can see if your hole lines up right here. You might have to loosen these a little bit. So that you can position this. And that's not grabbing it yet. Inside there, see what the deal is. I want to see what it is. We're pinching. I'm going to take these screws back out. We were pinching the power connector from the fan underneath the power supply board. The power supply. So that's why that wasn't lining up too good. So another thing to be careful about. Pretty tight quarters in here. I'm going to go ahead and plug that in. Plug that in now. Okay, that's in. Make sure these are out of the way. And like so. Yes. The screws are lining up with the hole, that's what you want. Now let's see how this behaves. Much better. Came right in now. Now we're getting somewhere. Okay, tighten the screws. I'm going to tighten down the heatsink by screwing them into the motherboard. They're all tight. Now then, we've got the heatsink screwed down, we've got the new power supply secured in. What's left? The power going to the drives and to the motherboard. So we'll take the 24-pin connector, and that'll go in. That'll go in right here. It's the only place it can go in. And it'll only go in one direction. Okay, that's in. We've got our 12-volt connector. That's going to go down by the processor. It's going to plug in down there. So we need to engage that plastic clip, or it's not going to want to go in there too well. That's in. Okay, now what's left? Power going to each drive, and that'll be it. Now you've actually got two SATA cables, power cables. We only have one SATA drive. It doesn't matter which one you use. And this will only go in one direction. That's the IDE. When you go to plug these SATA cables in, the yellow wire always goes to your left, so you don't. Nice and easy, and that's seated. Now, this would be for a floppy drive, and in this case we don't have one, so we don't need it. You can just pick one of these two, it doesn't matter, and simply plug it in. It's like a D sub shape. And that's seated. Now if you wanted to be fancy or cosmetic about this, although you're not going to see inside of it with a cover on it, but if you wanted to prevent, you know, any cables from, let's say, getting inside the fan, what you can do is make a very neat, get some cable ties and cable tie these together, all of them together, so that they don't go anywhere on you. Okay. Now, looking at this, the way we have the cables, the wires, it doesn't look like, it looks like he'll be okay. This is going to be stationary. It's not going in a vehicle, and that's going to be okay like that. Okay. Memory cards are seated. These are your memory sticks. Here. Okay. And what I'll do, excuse me, what I'll do is I'll give a once over at these capacitors, and this looks like a fairly healthy motherboard, minus the dust. But sometimes you'll notice those, even the capacitors on the boards will tend to dry up, these electrolytics. And when that happens, it can cause some issues too. And I know I made a video of that on a different channel about a year ago. Okay, we're ready to try this out. Now, at this point, I'm feeling pretty confident, so I'm going to go ahead and put the cover back on. USB printer, and VGA. Let's see what happens. Houston, we have ignition. We got a good screen. It hasn't turned power down. And at this point, If the last known good configuration screen came up, we would go with that. But I would just go ahead at this point and start Windows normally. Okay. My keyboard was so tight, I have not enough room with the keyboard, and it came unplugged. So my keyboard was not responding. So I had to go back and look at that, and it came unplugged. And it went ahead anyways with the selection that was highlighted. So we're good.
Okay.
That's how we do it.
Stop it.
And cut.